Welcome to Matters Financial, Geopolitical from the Frontier. I trust you had a good weekend. We certainly had a most enjoyable one. I'd like to first thank the French ambassador to Kenya, His Excellency Remy Marchot, I hope that's correctly pronounced, and his lovely wife, Madame Marchot, a mean original family friend, for the invitation to celebrate the 250th anniversary of, I think it was a Hennessy Cognac, and they've created a special Cognac, an H250, and Madame Marchot did this extraordinarily fantastic dinner. She never appeared from the kitchen until the very end, and it really was a fabulous evening. I'll put up a photograph of the bottle, which was rather grand and most enjoyable, and that took me back to Richard Kapuscinski, who says there is a lot of warmth in an old cognac, a lot of sun. It will go to one's head calmly, without hurry. Very big thank you to Sankara Nairobi for hosting Mindspeak over the weekend. Thank you to them. I'd like to also thank my guest, Pradeep Panrana, for an outstanding Mindspeak session on Saturday as well. We're now in the edit suite. According to some of the trackers we use, we made about 13.19 million impressions. Great talk about East Africa, about cement, about guiding philosophy of what's taken Pradeep from a small company in the early 90s to this very large, the largest producer of cement in the region. Macro thoughts, I just wrote risk on, as I've been saying for the last few days. I took this photograph of violet jacaranda flower-strewn streets, the muttering retreats we were coming around the back of Muthaiga. Nothing like some of the photographs I've seen on Twitter, but it's my effort. For some reason I went back to Donald Rumsfeld and have a look at this photograph of him by Richard Avedon, taken in 1976. And of course he said there are known knowns, there are things we know that we know. There are known unknowns, that is to say there are things we know we don't know, but there are also unknown unknowns. There are things we don't know we don't know. A powerful statement, I think. And then try this one from Mario Andretti. If everything seems under control, you're just not going fast enough. And on that note, I'll put up a photograph of that Jaguar. I had such fun driving around in Johannesburg. And then I was reading a story about Ferrari, which has just had an IPO, but Enzo Ferrari was so determined to protect his young son from the dangers of motorsport that he ordered his workers not to let the boy sit in team cars, so he wouldn't ever dream of becoming a racing driver. Z News: world will bypass its 2 centigrade global warming limit despite carbon pledges. I can't help feeling we're so finely tuned in this world of ours, and we're playing with it in a way which could send it haywire. Holger tweeted this photograph of Berlin a couple of days ago, very beautiful, the arch. For much of the decade before 2011, global figures for displaced people were relatively stable. Between 2011 and 2014, they rose 40%. 2014 was the highest annual increase on record. Record 60 million people currently uprooted by war and instability around the world, many of them on Europe's perimeter in the Middle East and Africa. This level of flow was likely to continue for years to come. Obviously, very sad events in Ankara over the weekend. Yanis Kutsomitas tweeted this photograph, and I can't help but feeling that Erdogan threw the match, and it will be an inferno that might well consume the fire starter. Conflict News posted a video of a crowd chanting "Murderer Erdogan" outside the Ankara hospital. Riots broke out in Ankara as thousands accused the president of failing to protect the peace march before 2 suicide bombers struck. How was there no police to protect us? So clearly a fluid situation developing over there. The United States is considering sailing warships close to China's artificial islands in the South China Sea. This is the Financial Times citing a senior US official saying US ships would sail within 12 nautical mile zones Within 12 nautical mile zones that China claims as territory around islands it has built in the Spratly chain within the next 2 weeks. Navy Times quoted US officials as saying the action could take place within days, but awaited final approval from the Obama administration. In May, the Chinese Navy issued 8 warnings to the crew of a US P-8A Poseidon surveillance aircraft when they conducted flights near China's artificial islands, according to CNN, which was aboard the aircraft. The US, in my opinion, is determined to pivot to Asia. In December 2013, I wrote about how the pivot to Asia was bearing its fangs, and clearly this is another attempt to do the same thing. I said then, I see the pivot to Asia as the encirclement of China, the shrinking of its operating theatre, and then lighting the tinderbox that is the periphery in Xinjiang might well morph into China's Afghanistan. I had not considered at that time financial warfare. One of the key elements of the pivot to Asia is the air sea battle concept. This concept envisages the battle beginning with a blinding attack against Chinese anti-access facilities, and that was one of the weapons that was shown at that military parade was a weapon that could interdict that blinding attack. Incorporates distant blockade operations. I think that's what it's all about. China has now completed the construction of lighthouses in this disputed South China Sea. I wrote about when Beijing came to Washington on the 28th of September and how Xi Jinping very graciously drew this sting out of what could have been a tricky visit. And I said then that that relationship could turn bipolar on a dime, and that the pivot to Asia remains the defining US document with respect to China. It's all about containment. Very interesting article in the New Yorker, Putin's Syrian Revenge. Let me read some bits from it, but really I thought one of the best pieces I've written, which gets beyond that, he's a maniac and a crazy. On Wednesday, Russian President Sergei Shoigu announced that 4 Russian warships in the Caspian Sea had fired sea-based cruise missiles at 11 ISIS targets in Syria and destroyed them. Russian airstrikes intensified and, according to Syrian officials, enable their ground troops to launch a new offensive. Over the past week, Ashton Carter, Erdogan among others, have claimed that Russia is hitting more than ISIS targets. The US State Department spokesman said on Wednesday, greater than 90% of the strikes that we've seen the Russians take to date have not been against ISIL or Al-Qaeda. Russian officials and state TV broadcasters alternately refer to the targets as ISIS and terrorists, perhaps intentionally obscuring what the targets actually are. Putin appears to be moving steadily towards the goal that many commentators have attributed to him since the Russian military operation began last week, propping up Syrian President Assad so that he can regain control of at least part of his country. One commentator suggests that what Putin is after is to discredit America in the eyes of the Syrian opposition groups by demonstrating that the United States cannot protect them. Whether or not this is indeed amongst Putin's objectives, he surely feels vindicated as he conducts an overseas military operation over American objections to prop up the right to punish the wrong. For years, Putin has complained about and condemned US and NATO interference and interventions, the bombing of the former Yugoslavia, the war in Iraq, the recognition of Kosovo, and the Western military operation in Libya. In late 2004, right after the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, which Putin saw as assisted or even orchestrated by the United States, he gave a speech that was filled with raw frustration. I don't want stern men in pith helmets to give the people who have, figuratively speaking, dark political skin instructions as to how they should live, and if the ungrateful native objects, he will be punished with a club made out of bombs and missiles, as happened in Belgrade. In his furious Munich speech of 2007, in the midst of the Iraq War, Putin spoke about an almost uncontained hyper-use of force, military force, and international relations, force that is plunging the world into an abyss of permanent conflicts. He continued, one state, and of course first and foremost the United States, has overstepped its national borders in every way. Well, who likes this? Who is happy about this? Then next year, Putin referred to the recognition of Kosovo as a terrifying precedent that is breaking open the entire system of international relations that have prevailed not just for decades but for centuries. The governments that have recognized Kosovo are miscalculating what they are doing, Putin said. In the end, this is a stick with two ends, and that other end will come back to knock them on the head someday, he said. 2011 Western operation in Libya overstepped the UN Security Council mandate, ended with the murder of Muammar Gaddafi. Putin compared it to a medieval crusade, and once again condemned American interventionist policy. The United States policy has a steady trend, he said. Has a steady trend. Now it's Libya's turn under the pretext of protecting civilians. Where is logic or conscience? There's neither. To Putin, the ongoing war in Syria looks like one more example of Western interference leading to destabilization and chaos. Do you at last realize now what you've done? He exclaimed in his speech at the UN General Assembly late last month. But this time his condemnation was followed by action. 2 days later, Russia launched its military operation in Syria, just as the West would not listen to his complaints and condemnations. Putin now feels strong enough not to listen to the West, as it accuses Russia of being deceptive about its real targets. Putin insists on the legitimacy of the Syrian president, and that he and his army are the only force that actually fights ISIS. Watching Russian TV coverage of the operation in Syria, one gets the impression that Putin is emulating not only America's interventionist policy, but also its approach to warfare. Talking of technicians in neat uniforms servicing the planes, heavy clouds of smoke, series of high-precision airstrikes hitting ammunition depots, voiceover mentioned drones and aerospace reconnaissance. That's what I was saying when I said he's showboating, which he was, with those missiles from the Caspian Sea. Russian commentator, getting accustomed to a state of war is easy and inconspicuous. And I thought that was the best piece I've read about Putin, because too often it's all seeped in that sort of, he's an insane individual. He's not. And obviously what's interesting is, for so long he said a lot, he didn't do anything. This time he did something, which is an interesting point to take on board. Russian airstrikes in Syria, the first launched by Moscow outside the former Soviet Union since 1979. According to Putin, more than 2,000 fighters from Russia and ex-Soviet republics are in the territory of Syria. There is a threat of their return to us. One of those is a fellow who's considered one of the leaders of ISIS, Omar al-Shishani from Chechnya. Vladimir Putin said earlier this month reports of civilian deaths in Russian airstrikes on Syria were an information attack. He touched on that, information warfare, particularly important in this day and age. Sky News says Russia has arrested a group of people who were plotting a terrorist attack in Moscow. I said in my article on the 5th of October that Putin is a geopolitical grandmaster, and in many ways he is. He was down and out and he's come back. Jerusalem seems in a state of intense stress. I'll put up a photograph. And then the CIA director covered up details of John F. K's assassination report reveals. Let's move on to the currency markets. Euro 113.94, targeting 114.50 now. Dollar index 94.75, and I think going to remain under sell side pressure. Japanese yen 120.14, Swissy 0.9610, the pound 153.58. The Aussie has had a strong session now, 0.7364. Indian rupee 64.725. South Korean won 11.4313, Brazilian real 376.23, some ways off those levels of 4. Egyptian pound 782.71 and the rand 13.27, and I think that's going to 13. Dollar index, let me put up a 3-month chart. I expect further sell side pressure now. Euro dollar targeting 114.50. New Zealand dollar, which I am very bullish about, I think you just buy it. That's headed higher. Let's move on to the commodity markets. Jamie McKeever, zinc soared 7% as Glencore cuts production. Biggest rally in almost 6 years, since 8th of August 2009. Gold now trading at 1165.41. Resistance was 1155. I turned around and said I thought it was going to get through it. It's gone through it. Runs up to 1200 in my view. Crude oil $50.41. I think the target is 55, but near term looking a little bit tired. Eric Scott Hunsader, Citadel booted from China markets for manipulation. I guess they don't manipulate other markets. Is China more advanced than the US? He's on a crusade about this kind of thing. But, quite often one could imagine if you did have a financial warfare department that someone like Citadel would be the execution agent, and therefore the Chinese might be right. Chinese stocks in one rally as PBOC deputy governor says China stock market correction almost over, and I put in parenthesis because they nabbed Citadel. Let's move on to African markets. A Guinean officer stands in the street after clashes between supporters of President Alpha Condé and his main election rival. This is Cognac in Guinea, but that was October the 9th, but it appears that it's actually gone off quite smoothly. I came across a website called Shades of Condé, and they posted a video, corruption, cash, Condé in the Guinea election. But millions of Guineans have now turned out to vote peacefully on Sunday, country's second free election since independence from France nearly 60 years ago. President Jacob Zuma says he will never, ever stand for a third term as ANC president. Even if they beg me, he won't stand, he said. I will never, no I won't, affirmed Zuma said. Let me put up a photograph of him. South Africa, however, is planning to leave the ICC. South Africa still holds the flag of human rights. We are not lowering it, he said, adding Parliament should now debate ICC membership. South African all-share has surged 7.95% over the last 4 weeks. The index is up 7.08% year to date. No central bank, no matter how much reserves it has, can take on the market and stem the depreciation of the currency. This is Lesetja Kyangayago of South Africa. Dollar rand, my target is now 13. Egyptian stock market, that's up 6.56% over the last 4 weeks. So Egypt and South Africa rallying, narrowing the year's loss to minus 15.45%. Nigeria's government, Baba Go Slow, is the economist. Muhammadu Buhari has earned the nickname Baba Go Slow from fellow Nigerians. He has taken his time out of the blocks. The former military ruler, who won elections in March after promising to root out corruption, has governed alone ever since taking office in May. He said he would appoint a cabinet by the end of September, yet as the deadline passed, he had named only one minister for oil, and he did not have to look far to find the candidate he picked himself. This week at last, Nigerians were given his nominees, but not their positions in his cabinet. Finding a clean team in one of the most corrupt nations on earth is not easy, but Buhari has tried. And they're saying, this is the Economist, Nigerians do not mind having waited. In the time they've been twiddling their thumbs, they've noticed a Buhari effect, whereby the nation has been terrified into better order. Power supplies have improved, leaving them in darkness less often. Oil refineries are working better too. Frayed diplomatic relations are being restored and stolen money being hunted down. Days before the nominees were announced, the former oil minister Desiane Alison Madueke was arrested in London with £27,000 in cash. She denies charges of money laundering, yet oil theft increased under her watch. For many Nigerians, her extravagant displays of jewellery and chartering of private jets epitomized all that was wrong with that old cadre of politicians. And I wrote about this on the 21st of September when I said, over in Nigeria, President Buhari has made the calculation that he needs to drain the trough. He is Mr. Forensic Audit. And I agree with that point. He seems to have terrified Nigeria into better order. Nigerian all-share down 12.96% year-to-date. Ghana Stock Exchange down 12.25% year-to-date. I like this photograph posted by Al Mas, taken at Jazeera Beach yesterday. That's Mogadishu, in case you didn't know. Sad Miller cuts output, fires workers in war-torn South Sudan. Sad Miller has cut production, fired more than half the workforce out of the South Sudan unit as a lack of foreign currency and the soaring cost of beer holds back investment, stifles demand. The company has got 250 jobs in the past 2 months, reduced output of local beer such as White Bull to 15% of June volumes. The economy in South Sudan will probably contract 7.5% this year. I think it's going to contract that more than My piece over the weekend is called Staying Ahead of the Curve. I was drinking a fresh coconut at Diamond Plaza last Sunday, and Abdi, from Limuru, he told me, introduced himself. He too was partaking of the same refreshment, and he said, "Ali Khan, what's going on here right about that?" And he's right, it's been so fluid and fast-moving of late. The shilling got to within a whisker of a record low from 2011 of 107. A research house spoke of a risk of a slide to 120. The Kenyan shilling closed Friday just below 103. In fact, I expect the shilling to strengthen to below 100 before year-end. My thinking is that the central banker, who has a lyrical turn of phrase as per his Twitter feed, and I quote from September the 26th, "Post 1 hour run, jacarandas in bloom, resplendent bougainvillea and fresh hibiscus, a hint of jasmine in the breeze, life is good." Central Bank of Kenya Governor Patrick Njoroge has established his inflation-busting credentials, admittedly at a time when there is very little inflation. I'm certain that Njoroge will prove a very credible central bank, and this growing realization will support the shilling. It is worth noting that the Kenya shilling has outperformed nearly every one of its sub-Saharan African peers. The Zambian kwacha fell 17% in a single day earlier this month. There's been pressure in the neighborhood, with Ugandan and Tanzanian shillings slumping to record lows, as has the South Sudanese pound. And I think the Kenya shilling has strengthened on a trade-weighted basis. In fact, T-bill rates crossed the 20% mark last week, and this extreme high interest rate structure is seeking to turn the tide in favor of the shilling. One of the mantras of the financial markets is that of being ahead of the curve. George Soros wrote a book called Staying Ahead of the Curve. By quickly establishing his credentials, the central bank is seeking to prove he is ahead of the curve, which is inverted at the moment. An inverted yield curve is when short-term rates are higher than long-term rates, and that the markets will recognize this and allow him to steer interest rates lower in due course. The real economy, GDP, popped 5.5% higher in Q2, but all the anecdotal evidence is signaling a very sharp slowdown in the second half. I'm being informed that inward-bound imports through the port of Mombasa was down 15% in Q3 when compared to Q3 2014. Oliver Mathenge signaled a very sharp slide in tax collections in his article last week. And that's a further problem. In fact, I think a 5% full-year GDP print will prove a long shot now. The real economy will be starved of oxygen if this rate posture is maintained. News that the lights were switched off in Parliament and that the government of Kenya outward-bound payments have stalled in some areas swirled last week. It is not yet clear whether this was a technical and technocratic malfunction, or a signal of financial stress, or even a subtle attempt to bring urgency to the debate around the recurrent expenditure ahead of a serious attempt to take a knife to it. How you interpret the above will inform your view of the shilling. It is worth noting that international markets now see a likelihood of a US rate hike this year as very low. This line of thinking was the catalyst for a relief rally last week in riskier emerging markets and frontier assets. The stock market has been bashed of late. NSE 20 closed at a fresh 2015 low of 4,017 and is perilously close to tumbling through 4,000. The stock market self-evidently is finding it difficult to compete with risk-free government of Kenya returns of above 20%. If I was sitting at a trading desk, I would be looking to buy 1 year government of Kenya treasury bills at 20+%, borrow against the position in dollars, run the carry because I think I'll get an FX gain plus an interest rate gain. My funding currency would be the dollar carrying trade. Kenya Airways has already withdrawn 10 billion shillings from FX and Bank's 20 billion shilling bridging loan. Kenya shilling around the 103 mark. Nairobi all share down 12.9% year to date. NSE 20 closed at a fresh 2015 low, down 21.42% year to date. Have a look at the chart that Pradeep posted of ARM's share price since it was IPO'd. It's been an extraordinary story of returns, notwithstanding even the pullback that we've seen this year, which has been quite brutal. Once again, thank you for stopping by.